All right, good morning and welcome to our webinar on migrating Lawson version 10 applications to Windows Server 2019. My name is Tan Razai. I also have Desi Howes with me. We're going to be presenting this together. I'm just going to do the quick intro and then I'll be back at the end to help you answer some questions. And as we're going through this, you can type your questions into the chat, and there's also like an audience questions section. But Anjali is going to get those questions together for us, and we'll answer them at the very end of this webinar. Again, this webinar, just like all our webinars, is recorded and will be available on nogalis.com/education. You can go there and view all our past webinars there, and this one will be posted probably tomorrow. If you're not familiar with Nogalis, we're an Infor Alliance partner. We've been around since 2003. And we just celebrated 20 years in March of this year. The bulk of our business is managed service, where we help Lawson customers and for Cloud Suite customers manage kind of the day-to-day running of the application. We also do quite a bit of consulting services, like the project we're talking about today, which is basically a server migration, all kinds of custom application development and things like that. And we have a couple products. So in our managed services, essentially, we help customers who are hosting Lawson on-prem or in the cloud with Infor to manage the day-to-day operation of it and do preventative maintenance and user issue resolution, ticket resolution, that sort of thing, provisioning, security, application process help, training, and that sort of thing. Our customers have seen a 40% reduction in maintenance costs and a 98% reduction in downtime. It's a 100% US-based group that has an average 15 plus years of Lawson experience and lots of referenceable customers there. On our consulting services, like I said before, all kinds of implementation services, functional, technical. We specialize actually in mergers and acquisitions. We've done quite a few of those, very large ones. Cloud migrations, any sort of custom reporting and development, web and mobile application, especially serverless applications in the Amazon Web Services cloud. And then a couple of products, very quickly, I'll go over with you. You're probably by now familiar with a Lawson Data Archive product called APIX. This is where we take, for customers moving to Cloud Suite or perhaps moving away from Lawson altogether somehow, we essentially take 100% of your Lawson data and we move it into a permanent cloud database for storage and data retention purposes. And then what we do then in that same cloud is we deploy our APIX solution, which gives you access to all of the same reports and screens and queries that you had access to, but in a read-only and flattened out way. Our next product that you're probably familiar with is a very lightweight Lawson security reporting tool called LSFIQ. We've had this tool now for 10 plus years, and recently it's become a lot more relevant since a lot of you have decided to stay on Lawson S3, given the extended deadline for support. So just a couple of quick bullet points on LSFIQ. It doesn't require an install, and you can be live in 5 minutes with this application. There's nothing to install on your server. There is a one-click audit feature, so you can just click that once a month to get your audits done. Dozens of reports serving multiple dimensions of security very quickly. Doesn't require any expertise or training. You can just jump in there and do it. And the most beautiful thing about it is for those IT folks that are on the call, you can give access to LSFIQ to your business users so that they can do all the security reporting that they want themselves without having to go through IT. These are some of our customers, many of whom are on this call. Thanks to those managed service customers who are attending today. With that, I'm going to switch over to Desi, who is going to be presenting to you what it takes to migrate to Windows 2019. Desi is our senior technical consultant. He's been with us many years and is leading kind of the effort on most of our Windows 2019 migrations. Desi, I'm going to start sharing my screen and I'm going to mute myself and take it away.
Thanks, Tan. Okay, let me share real quick. Okay. Hi, everybody. Like Tan said, my name is Desi Howes. I have been working with Lawson for a little over 10 years now, doing installs, patching, system administration, custom development, interfaces, things like that. What we're discussing with you guys today is the need to move to Windows 2019 and how to make that kind of a smooth effort for your organization. First of all, why are we migrating to Windows 2019? As most of you know, the reason you are here is that Windows 2012 R2 end of extended support is this October. I'm going to repeat myself, this October. So the first 5 months of this year have gone by super fast for me personally, so I see no reason why the second 5 months aren't going to do the same thing. So it's crunch time. It's time to start thinking about getting off that older technology and getting onto a supported environment. This conversation is also good for anyone who is moving from any type of environment like AIX or wherever into Windows. So this is also a good opportunity to move your system over into Windows if that's what your organization would like to do. What are the risks of not migrating to Windows 2019? If you're still on 2012, and we are aware that there are some utilities that will allow you to stay on 2012 for a little while longer, but the problem is, as you know, all your components, your security, that's going to all get out of date rather quickly. I'm sure your internal IT staff is more than aware of that. But additionally, you're looking at having issues potentially with regulatory patching for Lawson. So if you use Lawson payroll or if you run 1099s out of Lawson, that sort of thing, those are just a couple of examples. Affordable Care Act reports, things like that. If you'll recall, a couple of years ago, Lawson or Infor edited the installer application that installs those regulatory updates. And in order to do that, everyone had to pretty much upgrade their core technology. Well, and that put everybody in kind of a loop because some people also had to update Java. They couldn't even install the new core technology without updating Java and that kind of thing. So if you run into that issue where you're having to migrate to a core technology that isn't compatible with your version of Windows, and you can't take regulatory patching until you migrate to that core technology, you're in big trouble. I mean, this is like big trouble. So it really is important. And regulatory patching is at the end of the year. And I'm not saying that Lawson's going to update their application yet, but who knows? They might. So it's going to be really important to get off Windows 2012. Additionally, Infor is going to have a more difficult time to support you. If you're on an unsupported environment, they may not want to support at all. So if you have issues and you're on 2012, they may tell you, sorry, we can't help you until you get off 2012. But additionally, they're all now working with 2019. So you're going to run into the issue where their support team doesn't even really know how to help you. And one thing that kind of threw this for a loop was Infor recently announced that they have extended the end of Lawson's S3 support to the end of 2030, which actually buys you over 9 years more on Lawson because they should give you extended support beyond that 2030 date. You know, everyone for a little while was looking at how are we going to get off Lawson because Lawson end of life is coming up. And that's not really the issue anymore. So you bought yourself a little bit more time on Lawson S3, but now you've got to get that off of your old environment. So this migration project is going to look very much like any other project. So there's going to be different phases, and this is kind of what I'm going to go through with you today. Some planning and decisions that you're going to want to make, how to prepare to get yourself into the best position to kind of hit the ground running on the project, executing, what are the most important resources to have during your execution, and then some tips for testing. And so at the end of this, you should have kind of a roadmap for how to have a successful migration. So these are frequently asked questions that I have gotten with every single one of these migrations that I've done. These questions have come up. So I just thought I would throw them out here for all of you. So can we upgrade in place? No, you can't. Windows does offer a utility to upgrade from 2012 R2 to 2019 in place, but Infor does not support that, and they've even gone so far as to say that it doesn't work. So I think that they've attempted it, and it kind of hosed the system to where it was irreparable, is what I'm gathering. So no, we can't do that, and Infor won't support us if we tried. Can we migrate to Windows Server 2022? This comes up a lot because that's already out, and why wouldn't you want to go to the latest so you're not doing this again in another few years? But as of today, the compatibility matrix only mentions 2019. So actually, they kind of even skipped over 2016. So 2019 is the only one that is supported right now, but that is subject to change. So just before you do any work ever with Lawson, you want to check your compatibility matrix and make sure you're going to support it in compatible versions. Do we need to upgrade our applications? You do not. Your applications, and for the most part, are not really dependent on your core technology. So it's okay to stay with your current version. And I am aware that for probably many of you, you've maybe opened tickets lately and with issues with your applications, and Infor has suggested that you upgrade. And they're right. It is a good idea to get on a more recent version, but it is not necessary to do it as part of this migration. Just because the underlying technology, this change is basically a fresh install. It's really a lot on your IT staff, and it's a little bit of a lift for your users. But if you throw in the applications in there, it's a huge, heavy lift for everybody. So we tend to recommend that you split that up into two separate projects. But naturally, if you really do want to upgrade your applications as part of this effort, and if you go through Nogalis to do that, of course, that is what we're going to do for you. Some decisions that you're going to need to make regarding authentication. First of all, have you already implemented ADFS? Are you like many Lawson customers and you have two separate instances of ADFS, one for Lawson Test and one for Lawson Prod? Do you want to continue that way? Because you don't have to. So things have changed a little bit with Infor OS, where you do not have to have a separate instance for each Lawson environment, and you do not even have to have a separate instance for Lawson of ADFS. You can have just an organizational ADFS instance, and Lawson can connect to that. So those are some kind of decisions that you want to make. This might be a good time to clean up your server footprint. You also have the option, if you want to use Infor OS as STS, if you want to log in through Infor OS, which is the Infor's new mingle, you could also connect to another identity provider using that method. It is important to note that for the purposes of IPA, we're not getting away from binding to Active Directory. It's Lawson must be bound to Active Directory because IPA can only authenticate with Lawson in that way. So if you have any IPA processes that connect to Lawson in any way, file access or DME queries, things like that, that connection has to go to a bound URL. So, and that is Microsoft Active Directory. So a lot of my clients are moving to Azure and they're wanting to use Azure AD for their SSO authentication, and that is currently not supported by Infor. So if you're bound, you've got to be bound to a domain controller that is hosting Active Directory. Speaking of cloud options, you do have options of moving to a cloud environment, AWS, Azure, whatever, but it is important to note the database limitation. So currently Infor does not support database as a service. The only thing they support is if you have an instance of a 2019 server and you install SQL Server 2019 on that server. So you have to install the database engine on a server. The server can be in the cloud, but it has to be a server. And it's the same thing for Oracle. You would do the same thing if you say you wanted to spin up a Linux instance and then you installed Oracle on there. It's the same concept. Again, just to reiterate, the Active Directory limitations, you still, even if you're in the Azure cloud or the AWS cloud, you're still going to need an Active Directory instance on a domain controller. Some other decisions to make, and these are things that you want to kind of have lined out before you start the project, and you're going to want to let your installer know because this could affect their timeline and affect how they do their work. So Are you bringing over print files? Are you bringing over other files like interface files, things like that, things that go on maybe a shared drive or whatever? So those two things, we typically recommend starting a clean server, like fresh and clean, and not bringing over all of this stuff, or maybe just bringing over some of it or whatever, archiving the rest. But it is entirely up to your organization, and your installer should be able to work with whatever you decide. It's just good if you have that decision made ahead of time. And then upgrading to Portal 10.1, I just want to show you a quick screenshot. So this may be an opportunity to go ahead and release the new portal to your users, or you may decide that you don't want to do that because this is a big enough change. But as you can see, the Infor with Portal 10.1, they've kind of gone more towards where the look and feel of Cloud Suite a little bit, and it literally is just a look and feel change. Everything functions exactly the same. There may be a couple of nice little gadgets like kind of at your fingertips kind of stuff, but other than that, it is exactly the same. So if you wanted to go ahead and release that as part of this, that's great, but it's just a decision that you want to make ahead of time and let your installer know. The compatibility, these are just kind of general high-level compatibility, the kind of latest and greatest thing. What I typically like to do is go and download the core technology and the landmark, the latest cumulative updates for those two, and then I'll go and check the compatibility matrix and just get all of the component versions that match those latest versions. So these are just kind of the minimum for moving to 2019. Server specs. So this is just from my personal experience. These are my recommendations. 32 gig of RAM, 4 virtual CPUs. This is across all servers that are in the Lawson ecosystem. Probably could go, if you have LBI or MSCM, you probably could take those down a little bit, but that's something that you'll want to discuss with your installer. You would know your organization better, so you may want to increase these accordingly. But I will say that for Infor OS, this is the bare minimum for Infor OS. You're going to get a warning if you try to go lower. Whenever you do the install, it's going to say, hey, there's not really enough resources here. And if you're going to use Infor OS, so what I mentioned before, if you want to authenticate using Infor OS as STS, this is going to be too small, because this 32 gig of RAM and 4 virtual CPUs for Infor OS takes up, just the app running alone takes up much of these resources. So just keep that in mind, that server, you're probably going to need to make it a little bit beefier. And then I typically will recommend going 150 cent above your current disk size. But again, that's something that you're going to want to discuss with your installer. If you're not bringing any files over, maybe you want to start smaller and scale out as needed. With cloud options, there's all kinds of easy scaling type of automation. So this is just like a recommendation to start. But again, just discuss this with your installer before you get started. This is probably the second most important slide, because this is where you're going to need to do a lot of testing, a lot of preparation in advance. So what I recommend is that you gather all the documentation that you can find for your customizations and create new documentation, if at all possible, for your installer. If your installer is helping you migrate these, they're going to need to know what they need to migrate and, kind of just an overall idea of how these things work, because there may be a little bit of refactoring involved. I mean, server names are going to change, directory names are going to change, things like that. So these things are, it's really important to have these documented and that your installer knows about them. And then during UAT, this is going to be really where you're going to be focusing your testing efforts, because these are the things that tend to break whenever we migrate servers. So to have a successful implementation, there are some key resources that should be involved. Typically, you want to have at least one project manager that can be on the organization side or on the installer side, or you could have one on each side and they can communicate with each other. A project management tool is good. Either your installer can use the one that's internal to your organization, or they might have their own. Like, for instance, with Nogalis, we use Monday.com. That's where I kind of track my tasks and my statuses, and I'll usually give my clients access to it. And then if they have their own, then we kind of marry those two together. Also, I recommend that your installer have a point of contact one person who they can contact if they're having some struggles, or if they can't log into a server or things like that, and that person can route them to where they need to go. It's just easier if they have one person that they can talk to, and then of course they can open tickets or however your organization likes to handle things like that. And then it's important to have buy-in from your stakeholders and users. Although we did mention it's mostly high-level testing that the users will be doing, but it does affect their lives a little bit, and they need to know that this is going on, this is going to happen. There is going to be a downtime. And speaking of the downtime, I forgot to mention when we were talking about the application upgrade, the downtime for cutover is vastly different, much longer if you're doing an application upgrade in addition to the server migration. So if everything goes right, your server migration is basically, the cutover is basically just a data refresh. So, normally I will schedule 8 hours of downtime, but it really shouldn't take that long. But if you're upgrading your applications, there's a whole lot more work that can't be done ahead of time. So it has to be done over that cutover weekend. So you're looking at basically a cutover weekend instead of a cutover day or afternoon. So that's something important to note. And you want your users to be aware of that as well, that they've got a downtime coming. For testing recommendations, the main thing that users are going to be testing is security. They're going to do high-level forms testing, but while they're doing that, they want to go to each of their forms and they want to make sure that they're seeing what they're supposed to see. First of all, that they can get to the form. They'll want to do a couple of inquiries and run a couple of batch jobs, make sure that they're not getting any error messages telling them that they can't do this. Because if we are not upgrading applications, then we can do a straight product line copy. So literally nothing changes with the applications and everything should get copied over as is, and that should just work. But security is a little bit more piecemeal than the way you have to bring it over. So that is where you have an opportunity for things to kind of go awry. So that is something that you definitely want to test thoroughly, is the security. And then interfaces also, like I mentioned before, and anything that kind of reaches outside of Lawson or comes into Lawson, those server names are all changing. So this is where you might run into firewall rules, you might run into directory naming issues and things like that. And then also you'll want to test your external Lawson applications, and that goes along the same lines as interfaces. That's something that is sitting outside of Lawson, but it's still part of the Lawson ecosystem. But these things are having to communicate back and forth with each other, so you just want to make sure that communication doesn't break when you move to a new environment. So here is a overall general timeline. So your timeline would vary based on how complex your migration is and whether or not you are upgrading your applications, and also what external applications you have. So if you don't have LBI or MSCM, then this timeline would decrease. And the UAT would also decrease. So like I said, this is just general. And what you're looking at here is about 400 to 600 hours, man hours, as a typical install. But again, that's dependent on how complex your situation is. And so you would work with your installer ahead of time to line all that out and then get a statement of work for that. So just real quick, there's a couple weeks first of requirements gathering and planning, and then the database configuration. Weeks 3 to 8 really are just your installer. So you probably will hear very little from them unless they're having some kind of access issues. So that's your installer doing the Lawson install, all of the external applications install. Week 3 to 10, and then after that will be testing interfaces and testing security and things like that. So that UAT also is something that might be adjustable depending on your users, like how long they like to test things and how much there is to test. And then it's not really a week of deployment, it's more like a weekend of deployment, but there are deployment activities to prepare for that weekend. So I think, Tan, you had a little bit something to add to the timeline. Gosh.
Yeah, so I think, I don't know if you mentioned this, but clients always ask, so how many hours of work is this or something like that. So based on several of these that we've done, again, depends on complexity. You're looking anywhere between like 400 to 600 hours of work for the entire project, man hours for everything. Now it could be a little less if it's a very vanilla move, or it could be a little bit more if there's complexities and lots of different things to test. But that's just kind of the general rule. And then also, I know we have a lot of our managed service customers on the call with us. This would qualify as a project that would fall under your pre-negotiated managed service rate. So, but for those customers who are managed service, don't forget, we still do need to have you on the calendar. Okay, so we want to make sure we have the project finalized and have you on the calendar. There's a lot of these projects kind of going live this year, so we want to make sure we kind of prioritize managed service customers, and please respond to those emails if you've got them. Yeah, that's about it, Desi. Do you have any more slides there?
Just the final slide.
Okay, great. So go ahead and scan that QR code, guys. That'll take you to a form where you can kind of contact us regarding this project. You can get started on that if this is something you want us to help you with. Obviously, we've done several of these, and if you want to just set up a time to kind of do a discovery call to see if this fits your timeline and that sort of thing, that's kind of the way to get started, is just by scanning that QR code and sending us a quick email through there. Our emails are both at the bottom on the sides of this slide, so take those down. You can reach out to Desi and myself anytime if you have questions or whatnot, if you just want to set up a call. So with that said, we're going to open it up to questions now. There's a couple of ways to ask questions through this application. There is the chat feature where you can post your questions, or there's like an audience questions feature. So I'm going to go ahead and play a couple of these questions now. So this is Desi, let's go ahead and stop sharing your screen. Sorry.
Okay, great.
And I'm going to go ahead and click that. So this is the first one. Are the licenses Desi mentioned needed for 10.1 portal or for fresh install generally? What do you think, Desi? You want to answer that? Oh.
Sorry.
No.
Which one was that?
It should be on your screen now. It says, are the licenses you mentioned needed for 10.1 portal or for fresh installs?
I'm sorry. The licenses are needed for fresh installs generally. It's for the core technology. It's not for the portal.
Okay, good. And then 17 to 18 weeks, is this per environment or overall? That's overall. This is for 2 environments, test and production. If you have 3 environments, it may be more. Honestly, if you have 3 environments, we should talk, because the days of customers having several environments, I feel like are relatively over. But there are some customers that can make the use case, but most customers can do it too nowadays. Okay, so there is a few questions that have come up. Let's see. Okay, so there's the questions here, and then there's a few in the chat. There was one that said, Hormoz asked, let's see, can we do it with bundle, or do you suggest, or do you recommend that? I think he means the like a CTP bundle, like an Infor bundle.
There isn't really. I mean, there's a bundle for cloud, but there isn't really an on-prem bundle. You would just update the latest cumulative updates. Infor is doing cumulative updates now instead of releasing CTPs all the time.
Okay. And then Javier asks, how many iterations are usually recommended? You want to go ahead and answer that, Desi?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that means like data passes, kind of. And if you're not upgrading applications, then I would say you really could do as many as you want because it's simply just a data refresh. But if you are upgrading applications, that's a little more labor intensive. So I would try to keep it to one or two.
Great. And then Matt is asking, will custom executables on the web server be copied over?
Yeah, everything will be copied over.
Okay. Let's see. How would you handle payroll runs? So I think that's referring to if you're running payroll, which many of you customers run payroll, and obviously on S3. How would you maybe time this around payroll runs? Obviously, we wouldn't do it on a payroll week. It would be on an off payroll week. Now, some of you do payroll every week, so we could potentially do this on a cutover weekend. This cutover, if you're only doing the environment, like Desi mentioned, if you're not doing an application, then the cutover is simply a data refresh because you've already done all the testing, everything's ready to go. We just do a data refresh. So it really shouldn't, it doesn't really present a risk of any kind, because worst case scenario, if the cutover fails, you still have your old server application running and you can kind of complete on that, and we could postpone the upgrade. That hasn't happened yet, but there's not really too much of a planning required around payroll in that sense. And then 17 weeks for prod and test, LSF and landmark. Srinimas, yes, that's correct. LSF, landmark, LBI, MSCM, all of those things. Again, 17 weeks isn't a fixed number in time. That's just kind of our estimated average, just to kind of give you an idea for planning. Is really kind of how long it's been taking us. Kimberly, would this server upgrade affect EDI processes, documents being sent and received? I highly suggest that, yes, you do test those things because when the environment components are reinstalled, every kind of technical aspect of the technology needs to be retested. Does it affect it in a way that you need to refactor anything? No, you shouldn't have to refactor anything, but you should definitely test them. Desi, did you have anything to add to that?
No, that's it. That was exactly it. You took the words out of my mouth.
And then Jeff is asking, if in-place upgrade is not supported by Infor, would you share more about the suggested server and cutover approach? Which data objects are used for data cutover? You want to take that, Desi? I think either one of us could answer that.
If I'm understanding correctly, the cutover approach is basically your whole environment is set up and ready to go. And typically I like to set up prod and have users testing and the interface testing done in the prod. That's the caveat that you are not upgrading the applications. But the data objects, so initially you would bring over the Logan and Gen data ahead, like when you get started. You could refresh that kind of, yeah, it's more of a manual process to refresh your Gen and Logan data, but everything else you can copy over. Your application data you would copy over during that go live weekend, and that should be all that's left is copying that data. I'm not sure if you're also referring to landmark data, but typically we'll like schedules and IPA processes and things like that, I will migrate those manually.
Right. And then Jeff, you want to read that question from Jeff there? Oh, I'm sorry, that was the one we just answered, right? Yes. So Scott is asking, what is the minimal requirement to install? You can use corporate ADFS, do not need Infor ADFS. I don't know if that's a question or not, but do you need OS Lite for Portal 10.1?
Okay, the minimum requirement to install, I'm not sure The
Maybe I think he's referring mostly to ADFS and OS
ADFS,
line.
yeah. So you can use corporate ADFS. You no longer need a separate Infor instance. And Infor OS Lite is that install is required by Infor that you have that application. You can still bypass it to get to Portal, but it's really not related to Portal 10.1. You just have to have that installed, and you have the option of using. It's kind of a wrapper for your Portal, just the way that that Mingle was.
Great. Desi, you want to go ahead and share that QR code one more time? Somebody's asking privately if we could see that one more time. Linda is asking, will there be a recording available for this? I got held up in a meeting. Yes, Linda, there will definitely be a recording of this on our website at nogalis.com/education. We'll do our best to get that recording to you by tomorrow, and we'll send everybody an email with a link to that recording as a reminder. So, and it'll always be there. There'll be no sign up or anything like that necessary to get to it. So you can then share that with anyone you like. And again, this QR code is something you can scan to get to a contact form regarding this very specific type of project or any other kind of projects that you're interested in. If you're interested in this LSFIQ security reporting or automatic services, this is a really good way to get to that, to contact us. Thank you, Javier. Appreciate that. Appreciate the comment. I don't see any other new questions. So if you have any further questions, feel free to email us, tan@nogalis.com or desi@nogalis.com. We're always here, very happy to help. No strings attached. And thanks again for joining this webinar. As I said before, all our webinars, all our past webinars are available on our site. There's a whole host of articles posted on our site every day. They're updated with tips and tricks and very, very useful things for maintaining the application and different processes and things like that. You'll find very useful. If you're not subscribed to our mailing list, please go ahead and do that on our site. And if you have suggestions for future webinars, please suggest them right there on our site. Under the education section, there's a section where you can do that. We look forward to seeing you on the next one, and thank you again for joining. We'll follow up with that email. Thanks, everyone.